How do we find the decimal number that is equivalent to a familiar fraction? Let's find the equivalent decimal number for fractions with a power of 10 in the denominator. Power of 10 fractions are fractions that have 10. 100, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator. These fractions can be written as decimal numbers. We get the decimal numbers 5/10ths, 62 hundredths, 93 thousandths, and 934 thousandths. We have also worked with familiar fractions like 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4. These can also be written as decimal numbers. 1/4 equals 25 hundredths. 1/2 equals 5/10ths. And 3/4 equals 75 hundredths. Let's look at how we can turn the fractions 1/4 and 1/2 into decimal numbers by finding power of 10 fractions. We want to turn 1/4 into a power of 10 fraction. We want to multiply by a fraction equal to 1 that will give us a denominator that is a power of 10. 4 does not divide evenly into 10, so we will use 100 for the denominator. 25 25ths equals 1 and will give us a denominator of 100. When we multiply across, we get 25 hundredths. Now we can write this fraction. As a decimal number, 1/4 equals 25 hundredths. Let's look at this on the 100 square grid. This grid shows 25 hundredths. There are 25 shaded parts out of 100 total parts. If we shade the grid a different way, it is easier to see that 1/4 of the grid is shaded. Now let's write the fraction 1/2 as a decimal number. We want to multiply by a fraction equal to 1 that will give us a denominator of 10. 5/5ths equals 1 and will give us 10 in the denominator. We multiply across. The product is 5/10ths. Now we can write this fraction. As a decimal number, 1/2 is equivalent to 5/10ths. Again, we will look at this on the 100 square grid. We see that 1/2 of the grid is shaded. 5 of 10 columns are shaded. This grid also shows 5/10ths. There are 50 of 100 parts shaded, so the grid also shows 50 hundredths. It is important to remember that we can find the equivalent decimal number for some fractions by converting them to power of 10 fractions. Let's use this process to show that 3/5ths is equivalent to 6/10ths and 60 hundredths. We'll start with the fraction 3/5ths. We want to get a power of 10 in the denominator. We know that 5 divides evenly into 10, so we will use 10. Now we multiply by a fraction equal to 1 that will give us 10 in the denominator. That fraction is 2/2. We multiply across. The product is 6/10ths. Now we write the fraction as a decimal number. We can use a 100 square grid to check our answer. The shaded area represents the fraction 3/5ths. We see that there are 6 of 10 columns shaded, representing the fraction and decimal number 6/10ths. There are 60 parts shaded out of 100 total parts, so the shaded area also represents the fraction and decimal number 60 hundredths.